So here we are, welcome back, doing Q&A.
Add Photo wants to know, will we be going into more detail with font face in the future?
Absolutely. This was sort of, since I was pressed for time, I didn't go quite into it as much as I would have liked, but I'll have to rebuild this entire page, and we will go through all the steps of add font face. And also next week, I'll be embedding the League Gothic fonts using the rest of the add font face syntax.
TT Design would like to know, what about a CMS? It wasn't included in the estimate. How will the client update the content?
We're still working on that. We have a surprise plan towards the end of the process. How's that? It's top secret.
We've had a couple requests to go back to the original website that we're going to be redoing, or at least the JPEG that we have, and maybe talk a little bit about the deficiencies.
Absolutely. Returning to Keynote and going to page 1. There you go. That's what the site looks like. The savvy internet users out there will realize that we've substituted a photo of the creativeLIVE crew there because we didn't have rights to the photo, which is actually on the site. And more important than I think, it's less important what I think is deficient. I think it's more important what our users out there think is deficient. If anybody wants to tell me how it needs to be fixed, well, it's actually too late because I've started redesigning it, but user feedback is really important.
Eric, what method do you use to test several versions of the site? Do you, I guess like Browser Labs? Or?
I cannot live without Adobe Browser Lab. And actually, let's go real briefly to, I have a live version up here, which I'm going to try to show real quickly. This takes forever, so it's probably good that I make you suffer through this, because Adobe makes you go through like a 5-step sign-in process, and we'll just take a bunch of questions in the background while that's happening. If we could pass Kevin the mic. But once you've actually signed in, then it works really well.
Can you just, for those of us who aren't familiar with this, can you just explain what it checks? It checks...
What it does is it actually takes a picture of your website. You type in a URL in as many browsers as you want out of all the range of browsers, and we'll show you a static screen image of it. It doesn't show it in real time.
So it shows how your site will be rendered on different browsers.
Exactly.
Ah, cool. Okay, thanks.
And I'm going to show you in just a moment. And say stay signed in. And they try to make you do it again.
And what's the cost for Browser Lab, Eric?
It's free. And it actually integrates into Dreamweaver. If you have Dreamweaver CS5, you can actually go straight from, there's a Browser Lab panel in CS5, and you can preview your site in different browsers straight from the Dreamweaver interface.
Thank you.
So I go to Home, Browser Sets. You can set your preferences. And then where is the test? That must be it.
And Eric, when you're using Browser Labs, how do you deal with the fixes?
Every web designer with some experience has collected a, well, we're only talking about fixes for one browser, right? We're talking about IE6 fixes. Anyone who's been building web pages for a while starts Googling IE6 bugs and how to fix them. Chris Coyer at CSS Tricks has a great article about the most common CSS bugs. You try to find problems that other people have had, and every bug is different, so I can't give it a short answer. I'm just going to show you my site, which I happen to know is HTML5 because I have the HTML5 logo in my footer now. But I know that this is built along the same principles. I can't show you my my other site because of the site in progress because we want to keep it a secret. But I know that if I switch to all browsers, Internet Explorer 6.0, I know that it's still working. It doesn't look quite as pretty, but my new semantic elements and my layout is working just fine. And I can test this not just one up, but I can get a 2-up view. And over here I can say, well, what does it look like in Safari versus Internet Explorer, you're going to get some differences between browsers. They're not going to be perfect, and you can see how different they are by switching to onion skin view. So by overlapping them, you can see that they don't line up perfectly, but if they're close, that's pretty good. So as we start building files next week in HTML5, let's make sure that we test in Browser Lab early and often to make sure that our layout is working.
And does HTML5 currently allow for the IE fixes?
Yes. So using the script that I referenced today, the create.js and the display block level elements, you can start using HTML5 in Internet Explorer, no problem.
And the HTML5 logo on your site, that's just showing off, right?
That's just showing off. This is, if you go to WC HTML5 logo, you're going to see that they want everyone to start adapting it and start showing it off. I would have designed it differently. That's all I have to say. What they're saying is, so what HTML5 is really is a new suite of technologies, semantics, online or offline storage, device access, connectivity, multimedia, 3D graphics and effects, class performance integration, and CSS3. It's a combination of technologies. Some of those things, I don't even know what they are. That's often web developer land. But they're saying, I know that I use CSS3, and you can do a badge builder. So I use semantic elements and CSS3 styling. I get to put this logo on my website. If I started using graphics 3D and effects, it makes me a bigger badge. And if I just decided to go nuts and say, man, I'm going to do it all, it's going to make me a super duper badge. And then I could copy this and put it in my footer, and this image would appear on my site. But since I'm not that super duper, all I really do is these two. I get a smaller badge. But as you know, I'm going to be I teach at Seattle Central Community College, and we have a portfolio website class. I'm going to put my fist down and say I'm going to require everyone. They can't graduate unless they build their site in HTML5.
And Erik, I have a question. I'm using the magic toolbar where I have the tools and I validate my HTML.
And you're talking about the web dev toolbar from chrispederick.com?
Yes, sir. That's exactly the one. And I'm using it to validate my HTML. Will that, when I go to that, will it validate the HTML5 yet?
Yes and no. There are HTML5 validators. Let's just go test my site. No promises. Let's see what kind of results I get. Oh, you know, I don't have the, sorry, I need that in Firefox. Andrew can do it. I've got the web dev toolbar installed on my laptop, right? I got it. Firefox. Okay. Go to Firefox. If you've got the web dev toolbar installed, go to erikfadiman.com and try to validate it.
Oh, one error. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, jeez. This is what I get for trying to perform without a net. I shouldn't have stuck my neck out like that.
But just, it says, an error found while checking this document as HTML5.
Okay, so it does validate. One error on my part. Let's put that on my to-do list for tonight.
It's line 133, just FYI.
Great, thank you.
So Erik, someone in the chat room asked that they tried to install the Arvo font off the Google font face, and they've had some issues trying it in different browsers and computers. Do you know why some of those issues are coming up?
As far as I know, that should work in 98% of all browsers out there. It should not work in Firefox 3 for Windows. It should work in all versions of Internet Explorer, all contemporary versions of Safari, Chrome, and Firefox.
Erik, from Me Photos, they asked that you had mentioned earlier that you're now finding that you're working better as a coder as opposed to a designer. And they ask, how would I design a site as a designer who doesn't know much about code? Any rules or good suggestions as to where to start?
Keep it super simple. Lists for navigation and floats for layout are the most important skills that you need to learn. As you can master those, the simpler a page you can make, if you think of all these divs as containers, and these containers have to be positioned using floats, don't try to do anything too ambitious. Clean and simple will be easier to code as you gain more confidence coding. If you're not good enough yet, code sites for friends for free.
Eric, Paul wants to know if we can revisit the create.js file.
Absolutely. Let's just look at it in Dreamweaver. Here's my page. Here's the link to it, js.create. Folder called JS, create.js. And one of the great things about Dreamweaver, it shows all your related files up here in this breadcrumb trail. This is all it is. And this is also free and available online, courtesy of Remy Sharp. So if you're going to buy anything out there, buy a book by Remy Sharp and Bruce Lawson called HTML5. These guys are like, they're the same people who run the HTML5 Doctor site. They are the best guys in the business.
Eric, a couple questions from earlier, going back to the project billing and such.
Mm-hmm.
Two questions. One from Anita. How is this project billed? 50% at the beginning and at the end, or as a billable on phases?
Well, we're actually doing this for free. We're doing this as a nonprofit, so we're making up the billing. I'm trying to show you an estimate to show you the process. Everybody has to figure out their own way of billing clients. The standard is 3 payments, a third up front, a third at a certain milestone, and a third upon completion. I have had many projects with people where I said, just pay me when you're done. If you trust someone and you know they're reliable and you know you're going to pay you, I've never been burned. I've never had a problem with that. And I've had other projects where I said, pay me up front. Choose your clients wisely.
And from Chick Design, I've had clients who are so vague regarding their website content that I can't estimate the job until they have approved a detailed sitemap before we sign a contract. How should I handle that?
2 ways you can do that. You can just you can take the risk and build that detailed sitemap on your own time before you sign the contract, and you might not get paid for it, and then just factor those hours in later. Or if you really need to get paid for 3 hours of work, insist that you get paid for 3 hours of work before you do it. Any project is going to require some speculative work up front. I mean, there's a certain amount of work that we can't get paid for. A graphic design firm says if you can get 70% of your hours billable, that's really good. Meeting with clients, there's a certain amount of stuff that you just can't get paid for. Clients are always vague, and sometimes even that time spent building the sitemap, you may not recoup it, and sometimes you just have to do that beforehand. Or if you can find a way to recoup it, tack it on at the end.
Sue and Gina would like to know, they know it's early in the course, but are you going to address mobile CSS for this site?
Maybe. There is no call for that in the creative brief, but I'm hoping to add an additional style sheet at the end to wrap it up and say, you know, this really needs to work on a mobile device as well. That's part of the surprise feature at the end.
And Poolbath would like to know, was WordPress or content management brought up with this client, and did they decline that?
We are currently still in negotiations about how to make a content management system.
Okay.
There's the needs of the user and their site, and there's what we can realistically do in the scope of the course, and we're trying to balance those. Or we might turn that just into phase 2 of the class.
Eric, Sue would like to know if you will show the HTML you just built to the client prior to going into Photoshop, because clients are so visual.
Mm-hmm. So this is what I did to make sure that I know it's going to work for me. This is what I built just before class and what I was attempting to build in class but ran out of time. I've got a nav bar, I've got a header, I've got a couple of columns positioned with some floats, I've got a jQuery slideshow, and a footer. I don't actually show this to the client. This is just for me to know that what I'm going to build on top of this is going to be easy to build. This is my code preparation. This is the couple of hours that I want to spend making this work, so I know that when I design a skin for this, I can drop the graphics into it really quickly, modify some of the HTML, and I'm not going to spend hours debugging it. So this is a preemptive time saver. And of course, and if she was asking about code view, probably easier to see in Dreamweaver. Not a ton of code going on here, not a ton of HTML. Really pretty simple.
Thank you. Wireframe asks, which CMS will we use? But
To be determined.
thank you.
Influx. The client would like to be able to update the site themselves, and we are currently working on how to integrate that into the course. No promises.
A question from earlier, are we going to be using any Ajax on the site?
No Ajax on this.
Sarah asks if you could recommend any good templates for individuals to create estimates and contract forms.
Oh, Andrew, what was that thing you sent me that? Remember that online estimator? We will try to follow up on that. I don't have any good templates. Andrew did send me a great tool from a website which has a web-based estimator that says you just fill in a bunch of line items, how much time you think you're going to spend wireframing, designing comps. It adds it all up for you and then lets you put in a multiplier by your hourly rate.
I want that, Andrew. Sarah asks, can you show a close-up of invoice week 1 again, please?
Yes. Does that read? There we go.
And Erik, is this keynote available with the purchase of the class?
It's a PDF, but yes.
PDF available
Yes.
with the purchase
The
of the
lecture
class.
notes will always be available as a PDF, usually the day after the class or whenever our downloads are available. So I spent about 7 hours just getting to this point, talking with a client, making some wireframes, doing some research, doing a usability analysis, usability and website analysis, figuring out what's wrong, figuring out just what I want to build and how am I going to build it, and preparing some code. So I haven't even touched Photoshop yet, but I'm ahead of schedule. Or going back to the person who said, my clients are so vague, how can I get paid for the wireframe before I've even written the contract? Let's just say it takes 10 hours before I even start building a website. I mean, this one was pretty easy and straightforward, but in terms of the meeting time, the code preparation time, the project management time, just to get ready to work, it's 10 hours. And if you charge $100 an hour, that's $1,000 just to get started. And if your client doesn't like that, you have the wrong client, or you're charging too much, and you have to determine that.
Paula Rama would like to know, have you ever encountered the client asking to see what you've done after a few days or the first week?
Yes, I have. I'm always gracious, as you know.
Can you pull up the wireframe again really quick?
Erik, do you ever use fireworks for prototyping? Do you think it's necessary?
You know, I just learned about this 2 weeks ago. I had abandoned fireworks a couple years ago, back in the Macromedia days, and one of my former students, Brendan Carney, had posted something on Facebook about how valuable Fireworks CS5 is to him as a prototyping tool, and he wrote out a series of lengthy notes for me, and I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. And I dug into it. Fireworks as a prototyping tool is fantastic. And I'm going to be giving a demo to my my class at Seattle Central next week, that you can go from wireframe to mock-up to functioning HTML prototype really quickly and easily. It's a fantastic application, and I used to dismiss it, and I'm really excited about it right now.
I've been trying to tell you that.
I apologize.
But it's kind of like if you're used to doing that kind of thing, comps in Photoshop, it's kind of like an object-oriented Photoshop that actually can spit out HTML that, or whatever, HTML that might be useful.
For years I was like, oh, the yellow one, I'm not clicking on that icon. And now I'm like, I have misjudged it. I think it's a fantastic tool.
I think that's all the questions we've got for now.
Wrapping up. Any more from the studio audience before we wrap it up?
I got one, sorry. What type of grid system do you like to start with, a 960?
960.gs is where people should go for a grid system.
Okay. And do you use them?
I think 960.gs is fantastic. Absolutely. That's an easy one to remember, huh?
Erik, a lot of people are asking about good sites to get inspiration for CSS-based websites. Do you have any that you go to for CSS Beauty or?
I just surf the web all the time, so probably a great place to start. CSS Beauty is great, but Design Float is a great website. CSS Cream. There's just, they go on and on. There's tons of CSS galleries out there. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next week. We'll be building something in Photoshop.